Here is a supplementary video to help you with some of the things in week 10, which is going to be on graphics in R. So I'm going to walk you through, show you an example of each of the types of graphs, the plots that you have to produce. What I will have as a caveat is do not use the data set that I use for that specific plot. So if I'm using the MT cars data set for that plot, do not turn in a solution for that plot with that same data source. If you do, you won't get any points. In another one where I may use like the CO2 data set, you can use the CO2 for the one that it was not used for that specific graph, but with a specific graph, do not use that same data set. I'm going to stress that to you because if you don't, you're going to get. If you do, you're not going to get any points. Now the four main pieces of it here for graphic systems. First of all, we're going to talk about Ggplot. That's probably the most standard library, the one that you see everywhere. Also going to talk about Plotly. I'm going to talk about Lattice and the Gplots too as well. So one of the cool things about Ggplot, despite having tons of examples out on the internet of how to do this. So if you search how to do a bar chart in Ggplot, you're going to get a ton of examples. One of the things that's also included with RStudio is they actually have a cheat sheet that's available to you. So if you go to, as you can see here, cheat sheets, and then you go to data visualization cheat sheets, it gives you this as a downloadable deliverable that you can take a look at. That tells you all of the main parameters that you can throw to Ggplot, shows you the way that you can call. So if you see a picture of a particular graph that you want to do, as you can kind of see here some of the different examples, you can just simply use this combination in order to get that particular plot to come out. So that's a huge help for you as you're doing Ggplots. Plotly, this is excellent because not only do they show you an example, but they also have this where you can use this in Python too as well. So if you search out Plotly in R, you're going to see it's plotly.com/R. You get this page right here. And from this page right here, you can pretty much just select any kind of plot that you want to do. So if you want to do a bar plot, you want to do a box plot, you want to do a scatter plot, and they give you examples of how to do that. Here is a piece of code to show you just exactly how easy that is to do in Plotly by calling the library for Plotly and then figuring it out like this, plot_ly, and then setting up some parameters and then just using that from that variable that you create. That will display like this example here that you see in front of you. So again, please don't use the giraffes, orangutans, and monkeys if you're doing your bar chart. Okay, lattice there's one specific question which is going to ask you to produce a lattice graph. And so lattice here's an example of some of the information that you can use for lattice. I'll show you an example using actual data. But lattice can be used to produce all kinds of different plots. Now, for this specific question, you're going to produce a 3D plot. And it's any kind of 3D plot, but it's a 3D plot you're going to want to produce using Lattice, and basically calling Lattice, adding some parameters. I'll show you the more detailed in just a moment. And then Gplots is the final way that you can do this, and I'll even show you an example of how to use Gplots. The documentation for which is in our documentation. There's also examples you can search very quickly off of the internet. So those are kind of four different things that you could use in order to produce your plots. Now let's talk about individual plots themselves. So first one is a basic histogram. We've already done multiple basic histograms before, so this really shouldn't be a surprise to you. For your histogram, do not use the MT cars data set. Here's an example of it. For doing a line graph, this is a line graph right here. Here's an example of how to do a line graph right here, just using the base plot feature. Now in this case here, I'm using the orange data set, so please do not use the orange data set on your line graph. One additional piece you have to produce is the locator. So that's extremely simple. If you just do text, bracket, locator, and then do look here, it's going to call this twice. So if you want to do it to where you can click twice on it and put markers on side of your curve, you make that parameter there too. But the rest of this kind of gives you the code for doing that plot. I've added some additional pieces here. So I've added some labels, as you can see, age and circumference. I've also added in the orange tree growth that produces at the top. It does limit the range down here and then turns around and calls it. I also apply a grid just to make it look pretty. So there's a couple of things in here which are not mandatory for it, but by doing this you make a prettier looking graph. Again, you do something like this without the orange data set, that's going to get you full points. Here's a scatter plot. This is extremely easy. Plot, name of the data set. Do not use the orange data set for your scatter plot. Here's the 3D graph using Lattice, so call to Lattice. And then there's some additional things that you have to do as far as parameters. So again, I'm using a space left columns. I'm also using a title on the top of it. These are not mandatory. This is to get you this nice little legend that's off on the left-hand side. One of the ways that you can do a scatter plot with empty cars is by using the cloud here. And so that gives you the scatter plot that you see on this left-hand side. So if you are going to use this, please do not use the empty cars. Use another data set. Now, I've also showed you one here with some volcanic data. There's also another data set that we've used down here. These are using different techniques inside of Lattice. If you just produce a 3D graph, one of these types, or some of the other variations of these types, but a 3D graph using Lattice, you've got the points for this question. Now let's talk about a conditional plot. For doing a coplot, for conditional plot, you do a coplot. And so here's an example right here where it's going to use CO2, and so I'm going to use the uptake and I'm going to use the concentration, the variables on those. Now I've added some additional items on here for the panel smooth to give you more of a smoothing. Use the X2 labels, and the data is coming out of the CO2 data set. You will have to do this with any other data set besides the CO2, but this gets you a conditional plot, so it should be relatively easy for you to produce one of these. Here's a bar chart. All kinds of ways of producing a bar chart. So this one right here is using the Ggplots, and so here you can kind of see we're using a tapply function in order to do some formatting on top of it. And then we add some additional functions down here, turning around and doing bar plot. So bar plot is the core of this. By using bar plot, you can produce that bar plot that we're looking for. Do not use the CO2 data set for your bar plot. You can also do this very, very quickly in Plotly. So I wanted to show you an example of using Ggplots. Ggplots isn't as easy to use as Plotly. As long as you get the bar chart, it doesn't really matter which of these libraries that you use. That gets you full points. Here's a box plot. And so box plot's showing you here with the whiskers on either end of it and the quantile breaks. So this is again using CO2 data set for your box plot. Do not use the CO2 data set. Here's an example. Now here again I'm adding labels in there too as well. I'm adding the main title on the top, and I've also changed the color to blue. Those are all kind of optionals as long as you have this first statement in there showing the two factors that you're going to analyze. That gets you the full points for this one. Next one is a density function. So first of all, you have to produce a density function using the density keyword. And then if you get that density function in here, then you can turn around and you can test it using a DF like this. In that density function, here's the actual plot right here. So this produces the data that's used in the curve, and then this right here is where you're actually doing the plot here, where you do the plot. So again, a very simple density plot that you see. Do not use the US arrest data set for your submission, please. Finally, multiple plots on one page. As we've been doing the CLT proof, you've seen us do this several times at this point, but for doing multiple on the plots on the page, you'll want to use that parameter function that we've talked about before. So here, parameter, PAR, and then use this MF row, and then by doing the 2x2, you'll create a 2x2 grid. If you did that 4x4, you'd create a 4x4 grid, and then simply just do multiple plots on one page. That gets you the full points. So that's basically what you have to do in order to get full points for this assignment, showing you examples. The only caution I'll give you is do not use the same data sets for those plots that I've kind of used here. Anything else that you had, any other questions that you have, feel free to come in the forums, send me an email, or show up to office hours. I'll field your questions there. Otherwise, have a good week. Thank you very much.